Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. This is Susan Ryan with the Greenhouse Project. Apologize for a slight delay. We were having some minor technical difficulties, but we are here and we're excited to do a webinar today on what I think is probably one of the most significant hot topics, and that is of workforce. But before I go there and introduce our speaker for today, I want to let you know that you are on listen only. That means your phone is muted. But it doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So at the end of the webinar, we're going to save a time for you to be able to ask questions via the question box. So to the right of your screen, there is a place where you can write your questions. So make sure you don't lose those questions that might percolate as the webinar is going. So today's webinar, I'm excited to say, is brought to somebody who is extremely well-versed in really understanding recruitment and retention and what really matters the most. I met Lori Porter, probably a couple months ago, and I say virtually met her via a phone call, and I knew very quickly that as we were talking about a workforce series, she was the right person to kick off the series. So let me tell you a little bit about Lori. She is the co-founder and CEO of the National Association of Healthcare Assistants. She started her career in long-term care more than 35 years ago as a dietary aide and then moved on to become a CNA for 7 years. She then became a nursing home administrator for nearly 7 years, operations director of 10 skilled facilities in the Midwest. In 1995, she followed a dream and she created this organization, the National Association of Healthcare Assistants, or NAHCA, to honor and recognize CNAs and other frontline care providers who serve our nation's frail, elderly, and disabled, as well as, and this is important, elevate the profession of nursing assistant through professional development, advocacy, and empowerment. Today, Lori has grown NAHCA to a membership of more than 30,000 members nationwide, with more than 800 nursing facilities across the country. So I really want to get out of the way, Lori, and I want to turn it over to you because every time I read the bio, I just thought this is somebody who knows a bit about what it's like, and you have seen it from so many different perspectives. So with that, Lori, welcome to our webinar today, and thanks for doing this.
You bet, Susan. I really do appreciate it. I don't consider myself an educator in any way. I'm a high school dropout, so that wouldn't be fair to claim to be an educator, but this is a subject matter that I've spent my life looking into, working with, over 100,000 hours in the field with CNAs, nurses, CNA supervisors, staff development coordinators, owners, and operators on the topic of workforce. But first and foremost, I want to thank Susan and the Greenhouse Project for inviting me to present this webinar. And I thank each and every one of you who are taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn a little bit more about how you may want to look at your recruiting and retention plans. I want to give you just, we're going to be on this first slide for just a moment because I'm going to give you a little more background. Susan did a great introduction, and I appreciate that so much. But again, not considering myself an educator, because of being a high school dropout, I grew up in the Ozarks, where no one is ever supposed to amount to anything. No one ever raised an eyebrow if a 16-year-old girl dropped out of high school and pregnant. I remember they raised a few eyebrows when I dropped out because I wasn't pregnant. What? She dropped out and she's not pregnant? No, I was going to move to New York City and become a soap opera actress. That was my big dream in life, to go to New York City and work on all my children. And Mother and I, not just being in the Ozarks, we were actually fairly poor, and my mom and I shared a one-bedroom apartment behind Tina's Beauty Shop in Pineville, Missouri. And she thought it was ridiculous. She came in to wake me up one morning, and she said, "Lori, you're going to be late for school." I said, "Mother, yesterday was my last day." She said, "I don't suppose you graduated early?" I said, No, not at all. I quit. She said, "Well, honey, if you're not going to go to school, you're going to go to work. And that's when I shared with her that I'm going to New York City to become a soap opera actress. And she said, girl, you don't have enough money to get out of town. You're going to get a job here. Well, in Pineville, Missouri, there weren't very many places to work. There was the chicken plant. I had plenty of friends that worked in the poultry industry on summer break, plucking chicken, deboning chicken, cutting up chicken, everything imaginable. And I remember I'd go to pick them up from work or something to give them a ride home, and you had to ride with the windows down. I just remember, oh my gosh, I couldn't work there if I tried. I wouldn't work there. And then there was the 100-bed skilled nursing home in our county. And I thought, oh God, not there. And so I noticed the little mom and pop hamburger joint had a help wanted sign. So I came back home and I said, Mother, I'm going to the lamp post. And she said, oh, no, you're not. You're coming to the nursing home. She was the dietary manager there, and she needed a part-time dietary aide. It's okay to talk about the company because they don't exist anymore, and at the time they were the largest nursing home chain in the nation, Beverly Enterprises. Chances are some of you are veterans of that camp from back in the day. Anyway, when you're 17 years old and you've told all your friends you're moving to New York City, you don't rush out and call them and say, guess what? New York's off. I've had a better offer. I've been hired on down at the nursing home. They're like, what? The chicken plant wasn't hiring? Well, I understood that because I really would have picked the chicken plant over the nursing home. It was tough. I didn't dislike old people. They just freaked me out. I'd go in, one or two times I went in to hit Mother up for some money when she, just going in to see her as the dietary manager, and residents would reach out and try to grab me with those thick yellow fingernails, and it just traumatized me. And so I finally stopped just going in. So now I have to go to work there part-time as a dietary aide. I don't know how this is going to work. And then it occurred to me, Beverly Enterprises, they have a policy. I said, Mother, what about that policy? You all on the call know the policy I'm referring to. You can't hire and supervise your relatives. I said, Mother, what about that policy? She said, I got special permission. That was the day I understood policy is not really policy. Or maybe policy is made to be broken. Anyway, so as you can tell, I did not become a soap opera actress and instead became a lifetime warrior in long-term care. I didn't know what the future held at the time. I just knew that I was pretty miserable being a dietary aide. I had the weakest stomach in the world. I did not want to be out in the nursing home. I stayed in the kitchen constantly, praying that a resident wouldn't come in and ask to go to the toilet or throw up or something of that nature because I just didn't think I would handle it. Well, you might wonder, you heard Susan say I went on to be a CNA for 7 years. That wasn't a calling either. My mother decided she was going to leave the area, and I didn't know how I was going to make it on dietary. She said, get a second job. Back in the 80s, they just hung postings next to the time clock, and I saw one that said extra hours to help maintenance. Well, I signed up for it. Administrator called back to the kitchen. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, hey, we found you some extra hours. I thought she was going to say to help the maintenance man. No, it's full-time 3 to 11 nurse aide position, and I have no idea how I'm going to take it, but I know I'm going to have to take it because Mother can hear what she's saying to me, and in the background, Mother's saying, you're not going to ruin my 5-year reputation here, young lady. You're going to take this job, you're going to work it, and you will not quit. You understand me? I spent the next 20 days waiting out her notice. As a department head, of course, she had to give a month's notice. 26 days I was going to have to be a CNA or an NA, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. But I knew one thing, as soon as Mother's U-Haul was out of sight, I was going to leave that building and never return. I wasn't leaving the residents. I was just leaving. I was leaving a poor training situation. I was leaving a poor leadership situation. I was just leaving. Co-workers made it nearly impossible to survive, especially the fellow CNAs that I was sent to work with. Over the 7 years, they weren't all great. The first few years, the first year was amazing. The 20th day, everything changed for me, and I don't believe our webinar today will let me go into each and all of my stories. And so, since we're speaking on recruitment and retention, I'm just going to touch on some of these things. But on the 20th day, I made a connection with a resident. It wasn't the kind of connection I had hoped to make. I actually feel like I abused this resident. Yes, I said abused. I didn't have time for her. She wasn't my resident. She wasn't on my hall. I'd actually gone over on the 20th in the evening to steal some linens off another CNA's cart, and this call light came on, and I thought, well, the least I can do is answer the call light. Maybe more will come of that story, but let's just say this. I disrespected Miss Punton horribly that evening because she had too many wants, too many needs, too many desires that I couldn't fulfill, even if she were my resident, and she wasn't. So that night, she looked up at me and said, honey, if you didn't have any more patience for the little old people than this, maybe you've picked the wrong line of work. I realized that night, where else can I go on this planet and have this much power and influence? Think about that for a minute. As a CNA, I had so much power and influence. I had the power and influence to make this old woman feel beautiful, special, needed, and instead, my body language, my huffing and puffing every time she asked for something, stripped her of her dignity. And thank God she called me out on it, because that night I realized I did receive a calling. It came in the form of a call light. Well, after the first year of really committing myself and doing the best I could and looking the part, dressing the part, got a little carried away, tried to look like a nurse, and then all of a sudden I became the brown noser. Because I looked so good, I was picked for different opportunities outside the facility. Restorative certification, med certification, you name it, activity certification. I was out of the building more than I was in the building, and then I became, as I said, known as the brown noser. After all, I have to say, that was a great title. And if hopefully I'll have some time to speak about that. Maybe somebody will pose that question, what did you mean, Lori, about being a brown noser? Because I love to talk about it, but unfortunately I have to move beyond this first slide. But just a couple more things. In the third and fourth year of being a nursing assistant, I was written up twice for my negative attitude. Oh, I could incite a walkout if I tried hard enough. I knew how to lead, I just didn't know how to lead positively. I knew how to fight, and I know that most CNAs know how to fight. It wasn't until one night in my 5th year being a nursing assistant that I was standing in the break room door trying to get everybody to walk out with me. And we were all young 20-somethings, and we had a 65-year-old CNA that worked evening shift with us. We didn't have anything in common with her. We barely even talked to one another. But this night I'm holding court, standing at the break room door, asking everybody to walk out. And Stella speaks up and she said, how long have you worked here now? I said 6 months this time, and it's been the longest 6 months of my life. She said, well, I've been here 12 years, and I believe it's been the longest 6 months of my life, too. She went on to say, this place means something to me. I've been here a long time. And I'm not going to sit in here and listen to you tear it down anymore. Frankly, I am going to sit in here. You're just not going to be allowed to tear it down anymore. And at that point, I realized who holds the power. Stella Parrish did more in that few minutes than any write-ups, any counselings, any scoldings could ever have achieved with me or with most people that are CNAs. I went on to be an administrator, a regional director, and as Susan said in my bio, founder of NACA. I really wanted to be the president of a Midwest nursing home company that still is in existence today called Medical Lodges out of Coffeyville, Kansas. The president, I'd become a regional, and the president was going to be retiring, and I thought, I want that position. And driving down the road one day, I realized in 1994 that no matter how high I rise in the operation ladder, I'm never going to have enough caregivers to provide quality care. I'm just going to have more families and more residents that I can ensure quality, safety, and dignity to. So let's get into the crux. That's kind of my story, my background, and the motivation which brings me here today to talk to you about recruitment and retention. We're on this slide, turnover. Turnover is very high. It has been for a very long time if you just boil it down to CNAs. Most facilities like to throw in all of their departments to keep that turnover overall percentage looking a little better than it would just if you do nursing assistants only. Turnover has, some buildings that I work with have 200% and 300% turnover rate among CNAs, yet their overall facility rate is much lower. Well, turnover can't be high if recruitment is the issue. So recruitment can't be the issue, or we wouldn't have turnover. Recruiting a workforce is nearly impossible these days. Everybody, there's a help wanted sign everywhere. I know, I just met a little CNA the other day that worked over, I shouldn't say little CNA, I met a young CNA who works over at a restaurant that I frequent, a Mexican restaurant. I didn't know she was the CNA till our third visit. She's the one that brings out our tortilla chips and our salsa. We had started visiting with her and came to find out she's a certified nursing assistant. I said, oh my goodness, why are you here doing chips? She said, well, I can make $2 an hour more as a CNA, but I'm treated better here. So that's something for us to think about as we look at recruitment and what we're going to do in our centers. It is nearly impossible to recruit a workforce, but is that what you really want? Is that what we want, caring for our nation's frail and elderly? A workforce? How about looking at growing a care force? Caregivers need something to believe in. They don't care about the budget. They don't care about your problems. They care about taking care of their residents, those who we all want in our centers, caring for residents anyway. That is their motivation. So today we're going to look at a few things that have nothing to do with cost, nothing to do with budget. I'm going to tell you right now, these are not high-ticket items that I'm going to discuss with you, but it's really going to take a great deal of courage. I'll say courage to put in place some of the things I'm going to talk about today. And please do put your questions up as we go along so that you don't forget them. And Susan will make sure that I get those before we get off this call today. Building a solid care force is the only way I know to win, to ensure quality with our residents. We talk about retention. I went ahead and let it be on the title slide, although I detest the word retention. Everywhere I go in a facility or care center, our retention, we've got to improve our retention. We have to improve our retention. Well, retention is an ugly word. People don't leave residents. They leave toxic workplaces. Retention, yuck. It's never been a good word, and most women hate it because we're all familiar with retaining the water. But the definition of retention is the continued possession, use, or control of something. We don't want to possess, we don't want to use, and we don't want to control our care force. Now, is it easier back in the day when policy meant everything and people subscribed to that and held themselves true to that? Yes, it was much easier. I still know an owner-operator who rules with an iron fist. It works for her. She's never called by her first name. Every staff member refers to her as Miss Blank. Even the director of nurses, who's been there 28 years, calls her Mrs. Blank. She rules like old day leadership. It works, but it's not any fun. We have an opportunity. I've listened and gone to seminars for the last 4 or 5 years on how bad the millennial workforce is. The millennial workforce is the greatest thing that we have. We just don't, as baby boomers and older, don't know what to do with millennials and younger people in the workforce. But let me just say this. When I was 19 years old and a CNA, they said that back then you could talk to anyone. Oh, these kids don't want to work. Anybody over 40 was these kids don't want to work. That's generational. It's not a millennial thing. Millennials are my favorite to work with because they truly do want to make a difference. They just don't want the drama that has eroded long-term care for years. So, if you're all about retention, this may look like your next job fair, because that is the only way I know to retain people, is to put walls up they can't scale. And that has never worked for us. I was in a center not long ago, had all these job fair signs. Are these really jobs? Are we trying to fill jobs? I was a high school dropout, and today I'm speaking to 100 or so people on this webinar. Where else on this planet can a person like me go and have a career? This has never been a job. It is a career, and people are desperate for careers. You can get a job anywhere. That's a heck of a lot easier than what we do in long-term care. Instead of retaining, let's look at inspiring and motivating a team of outstanding professionals at every single level. For those of you that have the ability to, go back to your employee handbook. If you're going to have a organizational chart in your handbook, I'm going to tell you what I saw in the organizational chart, and which most caregivers see in the organizational chart. We're low man on the totem pole. That is the totem pole that runs down the center of that organizational chart. The administrator or whatever director, that is where they're coming from. They're not looking to sell a career. As a matter of fact, in interviews, we often, right off the bat, would you like to go to nursing school? We can't understand why anyone would be a CNA if they could be a nurse. I'm going to tell you, Vivian Tellis-Nyack, Dr. Nyack, developed a survey for us back in 2000. We sent it to 25,000 CNAs across the country. We got approximately 5,000 back, a little shy of 5,000. And only 6% of those wanted to be nurses. CNAs love caring for the residents. It's a relationship that has to be respected. I've never said CNAs are the most important, but I will say the relationship CNAs and residents have is the most important relationship. So as I said earlier, in order to accomplish some of these things, it's going to take a lot of guts, a lot of courage. And next, I'm going to talk to you for the rest of this webinar about the 9 fundamental needs for building a lasting team. It is tough, but it has to be done. Otherwise, we're going to continue to whine about workforce. Here is how you build a successful team. These are not my fundamental needs. I didn't write the recipe, but I followed the recipe, and it works. So we'll get right into the 9 fundamentals for building a lasting team. Let's look at the first one here. Number 1, everyone needs to feel a sense of belonging. Now, I mean every member of the team. The administrator, the dietary manager, the CNA, the director of nursing, the dietary aide, the maintenance man, every person in your center. And I just left a 280-bed building last week. I understand that this is a Herculean effort, but you have to gauge it with how important it is. So, I know as a former operator that money was not plentiful. We do not need to invest in crazy incentives. I remember back in '98, a company bought 500, back in this will show how long ago it was. They were called boom boxes, these little stereos you carried on your shoulder, so to speak. They were going to give a boom box out with to every applicant. 2 years later, they were still paying storage on a whole storage full of boom boxes. We can't incentivize people to care. So, in the beginning, under the first need of every member feeling a sense of belonging, it's critical in the beginning days for the new team member to feel accepted and appreciated. There's a couple of ways that you can achieve this. One is looking at your onboarding. You have to have outstanding onboarding. That I have in my notes section over here is a whole nother webinar in itself, so I'm just going to throw that out there. But we do a miserable job in our profession across the board of recruiting people, recruiting caring individuals with the potential of greatness, because we have such poor onboarding and orientation practices. The second way to achieve that, and truly they're just one hand in hand, it's not an either-or situation. You need outstanding onboarding, and you also need designated trainers who know more than just the job duties. Any agency nursing assistant can walk in a building in the United States of America and start providing ADLs for residents. That's our skill. That's what we know. We know that's going to be a part of any position that we take as a CNA. What we don't understand is what motivates you and what inspires you. So for me to feel like I belong, I have to know why you feel you belong. A designated trainer. Here at NACA, we call them a NACA preceptor. We have a very intensive 2-week training program to become a certified preceptor, to train, orientate, educate, motivate, and inspire and lead your fellow newly hired nursing assistants and caregivers. Our second fundamental need is to know that progress is being made. It's tough to see progress because of the nature of our business. However, it is critical in order to create this care force, people have to know that progress is being made. I often think of shift work as like hamsters on a wheel. 6:30 a.m., day shift gets on the wheel. Whether you're a CNA or whether you're a nurse, you are turning that wheel nonstop. If you're a nurse, calling doctors, getting orders. Oh my goodness, we're having 3 admissions today. And if I'm lucky enough to turn the wheel till my shift ends and I don't have to stay over to do an admission, someone else jumps on the wheel for the evening shift. CNAs. I knew what color dress Bessie liked on Tuesdays and what day Fred wanted his shower like clockwork. I'm on the wheel, spinning. I am running that wheel for 7.5 solid hours or 8, whatever you're given in your current center. Well, as I said, one jumps off and another jumps on, and they have no idea if progress is being made. This is what leads to job burnout. This is the number one cause of job burnout, not knowing if progress is being made. I'll speak a little bit more on that as we go through some of these other needs. To know what is expected. Our way of communication is a mandatory in-service. Now that people have gone to direct deposits, companies have gone to direct deposits, they've stopped holding paychecks hostage until you attend the in-service. We have for years treated our staffs as if they were cattle. Go to the in-service, sign the sign-in sheet, do this, do that, be here, smile, this. Never have we truly understood what is expected. You've got to find a better communication plan. In this day and age, there's a number of apps and various things, but it is critical for each team member to know what is expected. I want to ask those of you in a leadership position today on the call, do you even have a vision? Have you created your own vision statement for you and your team? I may love you, I may like you, but if I don't know what your vision is and where you want to lead me and the team, I'm not sure I want to go. I need to know what is important to you. And too many times I hear in interviews, we expect quality care. Quality care is the goal. Quality care as a vision is not measurable. You guys have got to try harder. Everybody who runs for president puts out a vision for their vision of the country. This is what I'm asking of each and every one of the leaders on the call today. If you can, look at these practices, take these fundamental needs, and create a plan. I can give you tips, but when it's all said and done, every care center is different, the size, the nature of it. I've been learning more and more about the Greenhouse Project. I'm fascinated, but I am fascinated with all of long-term care because anyone who is committed to caring for elders is pretty tops in my book. Now, here's number 4 here. We could make some real fun with this one. Feel challenged in their work. I bet everybody on the call right now feels pretty challenged in their work. But that is not the kind of challenge I'm talking about. I'm not talking about low census, regulation, staff shortages. That stuff is never ending. I'm talking about challenged in your work. Are you focused on what's wrong? As a caregiver, as a CNA, we feel like all anyone ever does is notice what's wrong. Now, as a former administrator and regional, of course, I was focused on what was wrong. I fell into a trap. But midway through, I realized people need to be inspired. We are in a caring profession, and yet we manage them too much like jobs. So, how do we become challenged in our work? Well, let's think about the what's wrong. This isn't your fault. I'm never criticizing leaders for looking for what's wrong. I've known far too many administrators to be terminated over poor survey results. What I'm talking about is focusing on what's right. But you have to put what's wrong in perspective. So I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of this, but surveyors come in and spend 4 to 5 days in your building to look for what might be wrong. Therefore, corporate, company, leadership, somebody from above comes around monthly to see what might be wrong. So state doesn't find anything. You may have a nurse consultant that comes once a month to try to look for what might be wrong. Well, the administrator can't afford to have a regional or the company come in and find something wrong, so the administrator's out looking for what might be wrong. DON can't have the administrator find anything wrong, so she or he are out looking for what might be wrong. Well, that just rolls down. And when it gets to us, it feels like all we ever hear is what we do wrong. Now, once I understood survey, not every CNA can become an administrator, but they need to know 3/4 of what administrators know. You know how I knew call lights were a regulation? CNA course doesn't teach you regulations, and certainly we don't learn them in onboarding. We know policy. I found out call lights were a regulation because my DON was down there all the time going, Lori, your call lights aren't in reach. Lori, your call lights aren't in reach. I'm thinking, man, doesn't she have a care plan or something that needs done? Finally, I said, Peggy, my residents are in the dining room. The call lights don't reach that far. I thought she was nuts. She said, no, I want them draped across the bed so they can reach them when they get back. I'm like, oh, brother. About 2 weeks later, somebody gets on the intercom and says, "State's here, get the call lights in reach." And I thought, dang, that's a regulation, I guess. There certainly should be easier ways in which to do this. We know the things we do wrong. I'm going to ask you now to start looking and focusing on what we do right. Because need 5 is every team member must feel their contribution means something. How to make somebody feel important. That's pretty tough. I'll give you an example of things that I noticed. This was pretty compelling. I've often been in meetings where administrators are presenting to the staff their resident satisfaction results. It's always obvious the staff listening do not connect the dots. They do not see those scores as their win, but they see them as the company's win, the facility's win, not their win, not that they're even part of that win. So we know there is a big disconnect, and that disconnect in itself is largely responsible for the turnover we do experience. How do we make someone feel their contribution means something? Well, I'm going to wrap that up. It's really practical, and you can put it in place to almost every one of these slides, so to speak. And that is going to the next slide, to be kept informed. Now, again, let's go back to the mandatory in-service. You can make it mandatory. I remember in the 90s when the state of Kansas gave us money to buy camcorders and VCRs so we could record it for the night shift. Still, you couldn't get everybody in. It was almost as if, what am I supposed to do? Take it to their house, put it in their VCR, and hit play so I can ensure that they have it, that they've received it? This is crazy. We have lowered our expectations ever since OBRA came into play, 10/1/1990. Rolling out the red carpet, we've sent the message, we need you more than you need us, and now we've been in a mess for 20 years. A mess with this so-called workforce. People must be kept informed, and the only way you can keep a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care center informed is to create what I call a scoreboard. This isn't a scoreboard for family and residents to see. This is a scoreboard on what we do right. And it ties everyone in to the same set of goals. It ties everyone in to the same outcomes. They have a stake in the game. Annual survey cannot be our only measuring stick because we've all been in this profession long enough to see good facilities get bad surveys and bad facilities get good surveys, and no one can wait a year to see the score. They will burn out. Let's look at sports. I see high school boys out in pads and uniforms in August practicing till they dehydrated, they're falling down, they're throwing up, their mothers have to take them for IVs. Would they do that if they wouldn't know the score till the end of the season? No, they just wouldn't keep it up. So everyone needs to see the score, to be informed, to feel their contribution means something, and to feel challenged in their work. A scoreboard. Each and every person on the team, not CNAs, everyone on the team, must have confidence in their leaders. And this is concerning to me because most leaders I see look like they've slept with a dill pickle in their mouth most nights, and they're not really that inspiring. So, is it everybody else, or is it you? It's pretty tough, but you've got to invest in yourself. You have to look inside yourself. Read these leadership books. Look at this information, not just that I'm putting out, because it's very basic and simple. But there's more self-help leadership books on the market than I don't know what, Pepsi Cola maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, I know this. Each and every one of us have to invest in ourselves so that we can be the best leaders we can be, because we stepped into these positions. We applied or accepted them, and we're in leadership roles, and we must be coaches. Managers don't cut it. I've always said this. Look, does anything about our role say team to you? We have administrators, directors of nursing, charge nurses. We don't have coaches, we don't have inspirers, and we don't achieve the outcomes that any of us are happy with. Most everyone I know in long-term care at the end of the day thinks they could have done more, they would have done more, they should have done more if there'd only been more time. But we waste more time. We let these pop-up fires distract us as leaders. That we can't do important work because we believe we're doing urgent work. We have to take a breath. You all have to find the courage in which to put a stake in the ground and say, we will meet these 9 needs. There's really no secret plan. If you develop something to meet the 9 needs in every one of your team members, you cannot help but have a successful winning team that leads to longevity, leads to happiness. But you've got to be responsive, you've got to be decisive, and you must be inclusive. What I've learned in leadership, and I've been corrected many times, I don't believe I'm perfect in any way, shape, or form. I have a lot of issues that I have to continually focus on as a leader of my own team and the leader of CNAs across this nation. I have to walk a tightrope of giving them everything they want, but also telling them why they can't have what they want, what the reality is of our profession. Most are very understanding once they understand. Most NACA members are really evolved CNAs who understand regulations, who have invested in themselves to become the best that they can be. And our goal as an association is to elevate the professional standing of caregivers, CNAs, especially in long-term care. We have the ability as CNAs to solve almost every single problem in long-term care. Before we end, I'll tell you a little bit about a project that I've been working on that speaks to all of these things that we've been talking about. But we'll move to the 8th need. The 8th fundamental need of every team member is to feel rewarded. Not everyone knows how to reward people, and we're pretty awful at it in long-term care as a rule. I'm in probably 100 different buildings across the nation annually. So I see a lot of trends, and some of them are very turn me off immensely. For example, we're not children. Don't give me a gold star and then tell me I can go into the administrator's office and pick something out of a goodie basket. I'm not a kindergartner. We're adults. We need adult rewards. That didn't sound too good, did it? Adult rewards. I'll rephrase that when I can think of a new word. But anyway, we all need to be rewarded. As an administrator, what a lonely, lonely place to be. There's very few people you can talk to. There's very few people. I didn't have too many regional managers calling me up to tell me how great I was. Mostly it was, how come your food's a dime over budget? Or how come you have 4 empty beds? There's really no place to go. So I believe those on the call, regardless of your position today, we are all in this together. And I mentioned the organizational chart before, and I think I got sidetracked. But if you have an org chart, develop a value chart. And that is a straight line chart. That is a left to right chart, and every position is on it. Because every position is valued and needed in a care center. I say housekeepers that are in our profession are 10,000 times more important than housekeepers in a hotel situation. Same with maintenance. Same with every position. We are helping elders gain every bit of independence that they still have the potential to achieve. We're giving people their life back. So we have to find real rewards. Stop trying to do it in group praise. I know as leaders we have very little time, or we make very little time. I'm really going to pin us down. We make very little time to make people feel rewarded. Sometimes it's because we ourselves don't feel rewarded. But let me talk to you just a little bit about how you can make a person who has a caring heart and a caring spirit feel rewarded. I can remember when our regional manager, when I was the CNA, and by the way, he works for me now, regional manager when I was a CNA, and he denied me for my AIT program because of my 2 write-ups for a negative attitude in my employee file. But he would come around and he would say to us, if he would bump into us, he would say, "Oh man, Lori, I couldn't do what you do." Regional managers think that's a compliment. That is not a compliment. You might as well not waste your breath. Because if you don't know the heart and the passion for a caregiver, that kind of makes them sick. When a regional or any administrator or any DON or any preceptor, caregiver, CNA to CNA, there is no reason we can't recognize and reward one another. But I'm going to tell you, here's where it comes in. You can't just say you're going to, you got to practice. You have to practice rewarding people. If you sit down and, gosh, the time's almost up and I'm just getting in gear. Sit down with your star players, not together, one-on-one. Find some reason they're meaningful to the team. They're meaningful to the operation. Speak with them. If you're going to do group praise, understand this. Half the audience doesn't deserve it, and the half that does doesn't feel it's special because the other half got it too. We're wasting a lot of breath and time when you probably have a select handful of superstars. Call them in one by one and sit down and have a one-on-one where you tell them what's great about them. It's tough, so take some time to practice it. As an administrator, I did this because I remember the first time I had to counsel someone about an issue, I ended up crying right along with them, and I thought, well, this isn't going to work. So I created an imaginary 2 imaginary staff members. One in the morning, I built up, I coached, I congratulated, I recognized this person for their efforts. I came up with every scenario I could think of that would require being rewarded and recognized. And then I thought of every scenario for my ride home with my problem staff member. And I would rehearse and go through how I was going to present that. Leadership requires practice, and very few people want to put in the work. That is the only way to make people feel rewarded. Now, I mentioned the regional coming in and saying, "I couldn't do what you do." Let me give you a tip. When you think you're going to say that, just say this: "Lori, I couldn't do what you do. I don't have your heart, and I don't have your compassion." And then you've delivered a compliment that sticks. I'm going to walk a little higher, a little taller, a little prouder. And this is what's important to most people that I know that are CNAs, that any one of us would be proud to have on our team roster. And lastly, sharing the planning. This one is so difficult, and I understand that I'm running down on time. Let me do a time. Oops, I'm not leaving much area for questions and answers. So let me do the sharing the planning. This one is, it could be quite complex because let's say you have 100 staff members. How do you include 100 people in the planning? It's pretty easy. Ask their opinions. I'm going to turn it to Susan and open this thing up for questions. I should have had my timing down a little better, but let's see what we got, Susan.
No, Lori, this was phenomenal. I just want to make a couple comments. And while I invite people to put your comments in the question box, the first thing I want to say is you kind of baited me. Onboarding, you said, is a whole other topic. So note to self, we will be in touch to explore that. The second comment I want to make is that when you said you're not a teacher, I beg to differ. I think I speak for those that have been listening as well, that you've been very engaging, and I, for one, have learned a lot. I've taken copious notes. So here's a question that we have here. I have read and heard several management guides. Oh, I guess that wasn't a question, sorry.
It was a compliment.
It was a compliment. Okay, thank you. That was a compliment.
Well, I want to hear that.
Yeah, and I wasn't the only one who commented on the fact that you're a teacher and that there's been a lot there. So somebody wants to know about, you made a question or a comment about being a brown noser. So maybe you want to explore that.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Negative people gave people who aim to please the name brown noser to keep them from aiming to please. Brown nosers raise the bar, and negative people never want to see the bar raised. So they thought if they could name us something we wouldn't want to achieve, but I think we should just own it. As a matter of fact, NACA, one of its best-selling T-shirts is Proud NACA Brown Noser, because we aim to please the families, please at work, please in our cares.
That's great. All right, here, let me do as many as we can. What other methods do you use to reward people individually rather than bringing them in and praising them?
Well, that's the one I know that works the best and has always proven true for me. In terms of, CNA week is coming up in June, and I would encourage everyone to utilize that time to find, that's a time when a token is an appropriate gesture. Make a lot out of that week because it's very important. It's an opportunity for each and every care center to make a big deal over there. And too often, even nursing home week sometimes turns out to be almost an average week in a care center. So there is, I don't believe that you can truly reward people financially in the amount that they need. When I was always working as a vulnerable, now I was a CNA when wages were $4.25 an hour, but money was not my number one. We did a diagnostic last week at a building in Michigan, and the administrator, I said, we'll be asking all the staff, we'll be interviewing them, we'll ask them the same set of questions. One of them is, if you became in charge tomorrow, what 3 things would you change? Well, before we even got to the interview process, the administrator said in the stand-up meeting, I already know what they are. It's pay, it's staffing, and it's pay. And I said, no, historically that has not proven true. And it didn't prove true in that center either. Respect, recognition, and having a voice is all that was said in over 70% of CNA interviews. So I think they need attention, and that is so much easier to buy some type of reward than it is to really sit down and share in conversation. But CNA week would be the best week, in my opinion, if you're going to give a gift.
That's great. So I'm going to give you 2 questions, and that will kind of wrap up our question. The first question is, somebody wanted to know, do you have suggestions for adult-type rewards? If we're not going to do the stars and everything else, what would you recommend? And then the other thing is, where is the best place to find potential new aides, nursing assistants?
Okay. Awesome. The best place is the uncertified. And we have to get to, I've been working and fighting, and I could use all the help I could in the industry to get CMS to approve NACA as a national CNA provider to where it's a portable certification. And I believe that we could easily recruit 100,000 new caregivers if we sent the message of a career versus a job. We have here at NACA pulled together what we hope, once we can get some funding, a great national recruitment campaign to bring people in. And then the adult rewards again. I think here's the things to pay attention to. If you have someone willing to step up and come in, make sure there's incentive for that. And if you have superstars on your team and you can do anything special for them and why you're doing it, $100 bonus, I don't care, whatever. Just the recognition of a certificate. Here's a little bonus. You've been a superstar player here for 7 years. I know it's not much, but I really appreciate you. You will save more in the long run than you will by doing a lot of different gift cards and those type things. And one of the things we did with that is we turned people on to expecting it. We weren't having incentives back in my day, but it like that. But it does create a situation where people think they should get something every time. But those who stand up, those you can count on, your core group, lift them up. Who cares if everybody finds out they got $100 bonus? You'll be glad to give it to the other person when they achieve that level of performance. Now, check with HR because they may think I'm insane.
Lori,
it really go ahead.
No, I think we could go on and listen to your stories, and I think that's what struck me so much. I mean, from your call to action moment, I mean, even prior to that, your story about how this came to be is just incredible. We will have you back, and I think our question box has been flooded with positive comments about what they've heard today. So thank you.
Well, if anyone wants to reach out, I think my contact info was on there, and I'm open for telephonic and in-person consulting on these very issues. So be happy to work with you or any of our listeners.
Absolutely. And just so everybody listening will know that you will get a link to the webinar that you heard today. Meg Laporte will send it out tomorrow. And there's also a survey there, and we'd really appreciate if you take the time to complete the survey. In addition to that, just to remind you that if you want to hear the next Best Life Dementia focused on retained abilities, that's June 18 at 3 o'clock. And you can sign up for that on our website. Another webinar will be June 4th at 3 o'clock. That's following up on our cultural transformation webinar series. Marla DeVries will do one on deep sustainable change for providers that cannot build new. And last but not least, we have a one-day workshop that will be in Detroit, Michigan, where you can get on site at the Tome Rivertown neighborhood and see the greenhouse homes in a partnership with Southeast Michigan PACE program. So please, we hope you'll register on our website for one of these webinars. We will send the link out of what Lori did for us today. And to all of you who listened, thank you so much. And a special round of applause and gratitude to you, Lori, for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, and the most compelling stories that I've heard for a long time. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you to all your guests too.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.